Welcome to the Quiet Archives. Let us step back in time together to narrations of forgotten manuals and documents from the early 20th century, brought to life with authentic vintage footage. If you enjoy these retellings from the archives of history, please like and subscribe. And so, we begin. Beekeeping by Frank Benton in charge of apicultural investigations. Revised March 1905. Beekeeping. What hive to adopt? The suspended Langstroth frame is used more than any other frame among English-speaking beekeepers. It is safe to say that in the United States, 500 hives are made and used which are essentially Langstroth in principle to one frame hive of any other kind whatever. In the British Islands, Australia, and New Zealand, the proportion of frames on the Langstroth principle in use is probably even greater, scarcely any other frame hives being employed. The success of American bee culture in the last 20 years was first attributed by European beekeepers to the honey-producing power of the country. But the most intelligent apiarists who have tried the American methods with the Langstroth hive now recognize that success is principally due to the manipulations that it permits. We can predict, and without any fear of mistake, that the principles on which the Langstroth hive is based will be admitted sooner or later by the most progressive beekeepers of the world. There being no patent on the Langstroth hive, and accurately made hives being obtainable at moderate prices from hive factories in various parts of the country, it is taken for granted that the enterprising beginner will adopt a simple form embodying this principle, the loose-fitting, suspended comb frame, as its main feature. The hive should not only be substantially built, but should have accurate bee spaces and a close-fitting rain-proof cover or roof. Factory-made hives, as a rule, best meet these requirements, as both lock joints and halved corners can only be made to advantage by machinery, and the expert hive builder understands, of course, the absolute necessity of great accuracy in bee spaces, as well as the great desirability of good material and workmanship. For comb honey, hives permitting the insertion in the brood apartment of any number of frames up to 8, or frequently up to 10, are most in use. In securing extracted honey, those with 10 to 12 frames in each story are preferable, and as many stories, one above the other, are employed as the strength of the colony and a given harvest may require. A construction, therefore, which readily admits of expansion and of contraction, as occasion demands, is desirable. Mention should be made of a hive of quite different construction, a prominent feature of which is this ease of contraction and expansion. It is the last hive which the late M. Quinby gave to the public, the Quinby closed-end frame hive. This hive is used with great success by certain American beekeepers of long experience and whose apiaries are among the largest in the world. Management in swarming. Natural swarming. When a swarm is seen issuing or in the air, the best thing to do is, in general, simply to wait a bit. The weather is usually rather warm then, and rushing about to get tin pans, dinner gongs, spraying outfits, etc., aside from its disagreeableness, may get one so excited and into such a perspiration as to unfit him to do with the bees that which is likely to be necessary a few minutes later. The bees will probably gather in a clump on a tree or bush near the apiary, and however formidable getting them into the hive may at first seem, nothing will be simpler than shaking them into their new hive, or into a basket or box, from which they may be poured in front of the hive, just as one would pour out a measure of wheat or beans. If any stick to the basket or box, invert it and give a sharp thump with one edge against the ground. If the hive has been standing in the shade so that the boards composing it are not heated, and if it be now well shaded and plenty of ventilation be given above and below, the bees are almost certain to take possession at once and begin work actively. The securing of swarms can be made, however, even simpler than this by having the colonies placed several feet apart on a smooth lawn or dooryard and clipping one wing of each laying queen so as to prevent her flying. The prime or first swarm from each hive is accompanied by the old queen, and if she be clipped, she will of course fall from the alighting board to the ground and may be secured in a cage. The bees will circle about a few times and return. Meanwhile, the only thing for the attendant to do is to replace the parent colony by an empty hive. The returning bees will enter the latter and the queen may be allowed to go in with them. The cage being placed with its open end directly against the entrance to ensure this. The swarm is thus made to hive itself. The parent colony removed to a new stand, a rod or more away, will rarely give a second swarm. But to make certain all queen cells except one may be cut out 4 or 5 days after the issuance of the first swarm. At the same time, 1/3 to 1/2 of the remaining bees of the removed colony may be shaken at the entrance of the hive containing the swarm. This reduces the population of the parent colony greatly, but the loss is soon made good by the young workers emerging daily, and the new queen which will issue from the single queen cell, spared when cutting out cells, will soon restock the hive with brood. The shaking out of additional bees, coupled with the removal of all queen cells but one, will prevent for the time all further swarming from the given hive, and in most instances end it for the season. The bees thus added to the newly hived swarm, even though too young to enter the field at once as honey gatherers, will nevertheless release from inside work an equal number of older bees, enabling the latter to go out as field bees. Each after swarm, second, third, etc., it should be borne in mind, is accompanied by one or more unimpregnated queens, and these must not be clipped until they have flown out and mated. The regular deposition of eggs in worker cells may nearly always be regarded as a safe sign that mating has taken place. Eggs will usually be found in such cells within the first 10 days of the queen's life. After swarms may remain in the air, circling about for some time, and they frequently cluster high, a good reason, in addition to the more important fact that their issuance is not consistent with the production of the most surplus honey, for the prevention of all after swarming. Artificial swarming. Where an increase of colonies is desired, and in case no one can be near the apiary to care for natural swarms with clipped queens, some one of the artificial methods of forming new colonies may be advantageously employed. Natural swarming is, however, to be preferred to a poor system of artificial increase. And no matter which of the artificial methods be adopted, it should be cautiously followed, lest, should unfavorable weather appear suddenly, considerable labor and expense be incurred to prevent disastrous results. It is also of prime importance not to weaken materially the gathering powers of strong colonies just at the opening of the harvest or during its progress. Hence, whatever division takes place, then must leave the field force, the gatherers, in one mass and in normal condition for work, that is, not discouraged by being queenless, and not overburdened by having brood without a sufficient number of nurse bees to care for it. Dividing. A plan which fulfills these conditions is the following. From a populous colony, a comb or two with adhering bees, and the queen may be taken and placed in a new hive, which, when other frames with starters have been added, is then to be put on the stand of the populous colony from which the combs were taken. The removed colony is to be taken a rod or more from its old stand, so that the flight bees returning from the field will enter the newly established colony. The old colony may be given a laying queen or a mature queen cell a day or two later. This finishes the work in a short time. Nucleus system. A better plan, though not so quickly completed, is to take from the populous colony only enough bees and combs to make a fair nucleus on a new stand. A queen is easily and safely introduced into this nucleus, or a queen cell is readily accepted a day or two later. As soon as the young queen has begun egg-laying, combs of emerging brood may be added from time to time. These may be obtained from any populous colonies whose tendency to swarm it is desirable to check, the bees adhering to them when they are removed being in all instances brushed back into their own hive. With fair pasturage, the nucleus will soon be able to build combs and may be given frames of comb foundation, or if the queen be of the current year's raising, frames with narrow strips of foundation as guides may be inserted, since all combs constructed by the nucleus will be composed of worker cells. Shaken or brushed swarms. The practice of shaking or brushing bees from the combs of populous colonies into new hives to form artificial or forced swarms has been practiced for many years, to a limited extent in this country and more largely abroad. As early, at least, as 1872, the late C.J.H. Gravenhorst, the editor of Die Illustrierte Bienenzeitung, author of Der Praktische Imker and inventor of the Bogenstulper hive, made artificial swarms in this manner. His articles led the author to experiment in this line, and finally to settle upon the plan of placing colonies designed for honey production in pairs in the apiary, and, after having brought them up to a suitable strength, shaking or brushing most of the bees of the two into a third hive at the approach of the main honey flow, one queen being allowed to enter the new hive with the shaken swarm. The latter is to be placed on the old stand midway in position between the spots previously occupied by the parent colonies, these having been removed some distance, to be managed thereafter as colonies that have swarmed. The newly shaken swarm is to receive comb foundation starters in the frames, and within a day or two surplus receptacles for honey. In case, however, drawn combs be used in the super, there had better be 1 or 2 frames in the brood apartment, partly filled with completed comb, to hold the first pollen collected. The shaking or brushing should be done toward the latter part of the day, and during a time when new honey is coming in, or in the absence of the latter, liberal feeding should precede the shaking and be kept up until the start of the honey flow. The shaken swarm is thus brought into quite the same condition as usually obtains in the case of a natural swarm. It is able to send out a strong gathering force at once and will store honey rapidly. The increase of 50% is as large as is consistent with the securing of the best honey yield. Economic plants and trees for cultivation for honey and pollen. Filbert bushes, useful for windbreaks and for their nuts, yield pollen in February and March. Russian or hairy vetch is a hardy leguminous plant of great value for forage and use in green manuring. The blossoms appear early in the season, and where there is any lack in early pollen, especially in northern and cool regions, this vetch will be found of great value to the bees. Fruit blossoms, apricot, peach, pear, plum, cherry, apple, currant, and gooseberry, yield pollen and honey in abundance during April or May. Strawberry and blackberry are sometimes visited freely by bees, but are generally far less important than the others mentioned. Colonies that have wintered well often gather during apple bloom 12 to 15 pounds of surplus honey of fine quality. The raspberry secretes a large amount of nectar of superb quality, and coming in May or June, thus later than the other fruit blossoms, and when the colonies are stronger and the weather is more settled, full advantage can nearly always be taken of this yield. Grape and persimmon blossom also in June. The latter is an excellent source. In subtropical portions of the country, orange and lemon trees yield fine honey in March and April, and the cultivation of the banana has added a profuse honey yielder which puts forth successive blossoms all through the summer months. Locust, tulip tree, poplar or whitewood, and horse chestnut, useful for shade, ornament, and timber, are all fine honey producers in May. The locust yields light-colored clear honey of fine quality, the others amber-colored honey of good body and fair flavor. Clovers, crimson blossoming in April or May, yields fine, light-colored honey. White, Alsike, and mammoth or medium, blossoming in May, June, and July, give honey of excellent quality and rich yellow color. Mustard grown for seed flowers from June to August. The honey is somewhat acrid and crystallizes soon, yet the plant, where abundant, is of much importance to the bees and the beekeeper in case other forage is scant at the time. Asparagus blossoms are much visited by bees in June and July. Esparset, or sainfoin, yields in May and June fine honey, almost as clear as spring water. It is a perennial leguminous plant, rather hardy, an excellent forage crop, and particularly valuable for milch cows. It succeeds best on a limestone soil or when lime is used as a fertilizer, and is itself an excellent green manure for soils deficient in nitrogen and phosphoric acid. Sulla, or Sulla clover, a perennial plant closely related to Esparset or sainfoin, succeeds, like the latter, best upon limestone soil or when fertilized with lime. It yields a splendid quality of honey from beautiful pink blossoms, which continue during May and June. The plant is an excellent soil fertilizer and of great value in connection with the feeding of stock, particularly dairy animals. It is, however, much less hardy than Esparset, and success with it can therefore hardly be looked for above the latitude of North Carolina and Arkansas. When the qualities and requirements of this plant were brought by the writer to the notice of a prominent scientific agriculturist of the South, this gentleman suggested as very probable that the Black Belt of Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas would be well adapted to it, the lands of this region being exceedingly strong in lime. In portions of southern Europe, Sulla clover is a most important forage crop for farm stock as well as for honeybees. Ceradella is an annual leguminous plant which will grow on sandy land and which yields, besides good forage, clear honey of good quality in June and July. Chestnut, valuable for timber, ornament, shade, and nuts, yields honey and pollen in June or July. Linden, sourwood, and catalpa, fine shade, ornamental, and timber trees, yield great quantities of first-quality honey in June and July. Cotton. In the South, cotton blossoms, appearing as they do in succession during the whole summer, often yield considerable honey. It would appear, however, that when the plants are very rank in growth, the blossoms, being correspondingly large, are too deep for the bees to reach the nectar. Chicory, raised for salad and for its roots, is, whenever permitted to blossom, eagerly visited for honey in July and August. Sweet, medicinal, and pot herbs, such as marjoram, savory, lavender, catnip, balm, sage, thyme, etc., when allowed to blossom, nearly all yield honey in June, July, or August. Where fields of them are grown for the seed, the honey yield may be considerable from this source. Alfalfa furnishes in the West a large amount of very fine honey during June and July. Its importance there as a forage crop is well known, but how far eastward its cultivation may be profitably extended is still a question, and even should it prove of value in the East as a forage plant, its honey-producing qualities there would be still uncertain. Parsnips, when left for seed, blossom freely from June to August inclusive and are much frequented by honeybees. Peppermint, raised for its foliage from which oil is distilled, is most frequently cut before the bees derive much benefit from it, but whenever allowed to blossom it is eagerly sought after by them, and yields honey freely during July and August. Bocara, or sweet clover, is in some sections of the country considered a valuable forage crop. Animals can be taught to like it, and it is very valuable as a restorer of exhausted lime soils, while in regions lacking in bee pasturage during the summer months, it is a very important addition. It withstands drought remarkably well and yields a large quantity of fine honey. Cucumber, squash, pumpkin, and melon blossoms furnish honey and some pollen to the bees in July and August. Eucalypti, valuable for their timber and as ornaments to lawn and roadside, are quick-growing trees adapted to the southern portions of the United States. They yield much honey between July and October. The carob tree, whose cultivation has been commenced in the Southwest, is an excellent honey yielder in late summer. It is an ornamental tree and gives, in addition to honey, another valuable product, the carob bean of commerce. Sacchaline, a forage and ornamental plant of recent introduction, is a great favorite with bees. It blossoms profusely during August, is a hardy perennial, and thrives in wet and also fairly in dry situations, withstanding the ordinary summer drought of the eastern states because of its deeply penetrating roots. Buckwheat is an important honey and pollen producer. Its blossoms appear about 4 weeks after the seed is sown, hence it may be made to fill in a summer dearth of honey plants.